Hello and welcome to this video where we are going to take a look at the very basics of getting started with Microsoft Azure. So if you've never used Azure before and you want to know how to get an account set up and how to deploy some resources, then this is the video for you. If you're already familiar with using Azure, then this video is not going to give you anything, so I'd leave now. But if you're looking for sort of the beginner's introduction to getting started with Microsoft Azure, if you're looking to try it out, then this video will walk you through that process. What we're going to do is we are going to sign up for an Azure free account, and then we are going to go through the process of deploying a virtual machine using the Azure portal, getting to know how that works, and we're going to deploy one of the free VM options you get for a year with the free account. You can follow this along. All you need to do is create an Azure free account, and it won't cost you anything as long as you use the free services that we're going to talk about and use the exact VM sizes and so on that I'm going to show you how to do to make sure you stay in the free allowance. You will need a credit card to sign up for the free account. There isn't really any way around that, I'm afraid, but it won't charge you anything. To get started, you're going to go to the Azure sign up page where you can click this Start Free button. And what that will then do is it will ask you to log in with an account. I've already logged in here, so you don't have to see me go through my password process. But you will need either a Microsoft Live account, so a Hotmail account, Outlook.com, that sort of thing, or a GitHub account. You can use a GitHub account as well. One of those two things. Once we get going with Azure and we get the accounts set up, we will look at creating Azure AD users, and you can use those going forward. But to the initial setup, you need one of those two accounts. And it's going to ask you for your details, and you're going to need to verify your phone number. So I will get them to text me. You're going to need to give it some address details. I've already filled in there. And then you're going to need to agree to the various tick boxes that you do or don't want. And then hit next. And next it's going to ask you to authorize with a credit card. This is basically identity verification. It's going to make a temporary authorization on your card, which won't cost you anything. And that's how they'll identify you. So you need to complete that part. We'll go ahead and do that bit off camera. And that's just finalizing the identity information. And in a minute, we should have our account set up for us. This can take a little bit of time just to create everything for you. So we're now signed up, ready to go. And so if we click this link, we should go to the Azure portal. And that hopefully will wants me to verify my email address. So let me just do that. And so that's verify my account. And then it's going to wants you to use the smartphone app to get rid of the need to use passwords. I'm not going to do that now, but you can do that if you want. Okay, and here we are logged into the Azure portal. And the first thing it will give you when you're a new user is it will give you some training material. So if you want to dive deep into some of the areas, you can follow this training material and you can go through some of these videos and so on. It's a great way to learn. I'm not going to do that, so we'll click close that. And this is the dashboard for the Azure portal. And essentially in here, we are going to manage our resources and create whatever we want. In our case, we're going to create a virtual machine. Okay, so let's take a look around the Azure portal and get to know how that works. So the dashboard page has some common links, some things you've clicked on recently, some things you might want to go and look at and so on. One thing you can look at, if you click on all resources, you can see everything you've got deployed in your subscription. I don't have anything, so you're not going to show you anything. You can also go up here and you've got a sidebar menu. And if you click on here and go to all services, you can see a list of all the services that you're able to create in Azure. So obviously, you've got loads and loads and loads of services that you can do there. But you can also then break these down. So, if we want to look at compute, you can get a smaller list of doing those things. One thing you can also look at in here is the subscription. So if you go into this top bar, you can search for any services. So if you search for subscriptions, go in there. So you should only have one subscription, which is the one you've just created. This will give you some information about the subscription. If you ever want to go look at the cost usage of this subscription, when you're perhaps not, when you are paying for things, you can do so through here. You can get some information about security of that and so on. And then also resource groups. Again, we haven't got any yet, but resource groups will list all of the resource groups. Every resource in Azure will go inside a resource group. A resource group is effectively a folder or a container where you put your resources. You can create any number of them. They're free. They don't cost you any money anyway. And you can stick your resources in those, and we'll see doing that in a moment. And then finally, one thing I'm going to recommend you look at is the what was Azure Active Directory, now called Microsoft Entra ID. When you create your subscription, it will have created you I'm going to call it an Entra ID tenant for you using usually the username. So you can see here, it's basically created one for me for that email address. And this will be used for any identity pieces. Now, most of the work you would do with Azure AD is if you're creating applications and so on, which we won't get into in this video. But one thing I would recommend is creating an Azure AD user that is native in this tenant that you can use to log in rather than using your live account. So what we will do is we'll quickly go and create a new user. Call it Sam. And it's using the default tenant name. You can create your own domains for the tenant if you want to, but we won't do that in this video. We'll just give it a display name. We can give it a password. I'm actually going to give it. There we go. Nope, doesn't like that one. Try a different one. There we go. And yeah, enable the account. And then you can fill in all these details. The important thing here is the user type you're going to want to set. Sorry, not the user type. You can leave all the rest of this information. That's fine. Yeah, so assignments, you're going to add a role, and you are going to want to make this a global administrator. This gives you full control over all of the resources within Azure AD. And this allows you to do whatever you want. So this is going to be your account going forward. So click Review and create that. And I can now see in my user list, I've now got 2 users. The one with the EXT is my external, the live account. This is my actual user account that's within Azure AD. And at the moment, that account has rights to go and manage Azure AD, or sorry, Entra ID. I will use those interchangeably, I'm afraid. But what it doesn't have is any rights on the Azure subscription. So what we can go and do is if we go back to the subscription, and we're going to change the permissions. So this is the first thing to sort of learn about permissions within Azure. Within every resource, we'll find this access control IAM page. And this is where you can set permissions. Now, because we've gone into the subscription page here, we are setting permissions at the subscription level. If you go into individual resources, you can set them at resource level, resource group level, and so on. So what we want to do is we want to add a role assignment. And what we want to do, because again, this is our global admin, we want to have access to everything, we're going to use the owner role. So there are various different roles within Azure, within Azure's RBAC setup that do give you different rights to different resources. You can see there are tons of them. But there are some generic ones that do sort of more overarching things, one of which is the owner role. And you can see it's under this privileged administrator role. So it's calling out these are highly privileged roles. You have owner and you have contributor. The difference basically is contributor has every right except for the ability to change permissions, whereas owner has permissions to do that as well. So we're going to use owner. We're going to tell it we want to use that user. So if we go into search by users, we can see we've got this user we created. Then we come here, you can add some conditions here, particularly for the owner account. So I mentioned the owner can assign permissions into Azure. What it's asking you here is, do you want to grant that user the ability to assign all permissions, or do you want it to be able to only assign permissions for specific resource types? We're going to select all because, again, this is our kind of super admin account. We're going to be very careful with this account. And then we can click Review and Assign. So I'm just going to copy that username. And so what we can do now is if we sign out, we should be able to sign back in using that new account. And it wants us to change the password. There we go. Okay, so now we're logged in with an Azure AD account rather than using the live account. There's no reason why you couldn't keep using the live account if you wanted to, but having an account that's actually within the tenant is probably a better way to go. Now, you saw when I logged in there, that notification. If you ever miss any notifications, you can click this bell icon and it will show you what's going on. And you can see it's telling me about the credits. So one of the things you get with a free account is you get $200 of Azure credit, or this is converted to pounds, but same principle. And that Azure credit can be used within the first month of your account. Once you get to the end of the month, it's gone. That's in addition to all the free stuff that we're going to talk about in a minute that come along with the free account as well. Okay, so that's just there for you if you want to use that. Okay, so we are going to go ahead now and look at how do we use the portal to create a VM. There are many other ways to create VMs. You can use command lines, infrastructure as code, all that sort of stuff. We're not going to cover that here. You can go look into that if you want to. We're going to create a VM through the portal. Now, we can just go in here, click on virtual machines, and we can click create an Azure Azure Virtual Machine. And there are two options here. There is the create a virtual machine, and there is a create a virtual machine with a preset configuration. If you click on the preset configuration, it gives you some options for preset workloads. However, none of these are the free options, so I wouldn't necessarily choose this. So we're going to go ahead and create an Azure virtual machine. And so the first thing it's going to ask is where to put it. So you need a resource group to put this into. Now, I don't have any at the moment. You can see it's empty, so I'm going to create a new one. And you can click here. You can also create this in advance if you want to. But we're going to call this demo VM. And it'll create the resource group for us. And similarly, we're going to call this is the name for the VM. We're going to put the region. I don't really want it in Australia, given that I'm in Europe. So we'll just go with West Europe. And then there are a few other things in here. So the first one is whether to deploy into availability zones or availability sets or scale sets. You don't need to know too much about this. Availability zone is the newest and the better option. This is basically how we can deal with having multiple VMs that are offering redundant services. So we'll take the default availability zones, and zone 1 is fine. The security type, there isn't really any reason not to take the trusted launch virtual machine, the default option, so you can leave that in there. Then the image type you want. So the first thing we want to make sure you select an image, and it needs to be an image. You see this here, it says free service is eligible. So we want to make sure that we are using a VM image. This is the operating system that is supported for the free service. If we pick something else, then we'll end up paying for the VMs. This is the first important piece. And we can choose here whether we want to use Linux or Windows. With the free services, you get one Linux VM and one Windows VM for free. We can pick Ubuntu or Debian for the free Linux one, or SUSE. Or if we want Windows, we can select one of the Windows options as well. So we can have Windows Server 2022 or Windows Server 2019. Pick whichever one you want to do for your VM. I'm going to go ahead and use Server 2022. VM architecture is x64, which is fine. And then when it comes to sizes, we're going to make sure we want ones for the free service eligible. Now, we've got a bit of an issue here in that I want to use this B1, which is the free one, but it's telling me it's not available in West Europe, which is not really great for a fresh setup. So this might be because we have quotas in place. It might be because West Europe's having issues. So let's have a look and let's go for UK South. We've switched over now to use the UK South region. You can pick whichever region you want, but obviously if it has issues with availability, you might have to change region. The free account has very limited amount of quota, and certain regions may not be available because it's free, obviously. The paying customers get more priority on those. We've chosen UK South, and if we come down here, we're going to pick Server 2022 again. And then if we go to our sizes here, for some reason, it's now not showing the free options in here. So you want to be very careful. Look at that number on the end. It doesn't say free service eligible, then you're not going to get it for free. So if we go in here, instead we go to see all sizes. And you can see that actually what we want is a B1S. That's the free service eligible one we want. And we should be able to select that. Okay, and you can see now it's showing free service eligible. So it is giving you a cost for how that would normally be, but the first 720 hours a month, which is basically a month's worth of hours, are free. Okay, so that's all the VM configuration done. We now need to give it some credentials. As this is a Windows machine, I need to give it a username and password. Give it that. If it was a Linux VM, you would have the option to give it an SSH key as well. And then I'm going to give you some information here about what ports we allow inbound. Now, the default here obviously is to allow RDP inbound, because otherwise how else are you going to administer the machine? The same with, if it's Linux, you'll get SSH inbound. This will allow this to your VM from the internet. Be wary though, that this will open your VM to being reached from anywhere on the internet. If you leave VMs open to the internet, you will find that somebody tries to log into it, probably fairly quickly. And so you're going to want to do some work to lock that down a bit further, which we'll do in the next little bit. But you do obviously need that to be able to get onto the VM. So disks, you are going to want to take the default on here for most parts, unless there's anything specific you want. If you add data disks or so on, you may get charged. Well, in fact, you will get charged for those disks. Again, the free account has one disk for each, one managed disk for each of those, which is free, which is the one we're going to use here. And any additional ones will cost. So if you don't need them, don't add them. Networking. So you need a virtual network to go along with your VM. So a virtual network in Azure is effectively sort of a software-defined network where all of your resources sit within. In this wizard, it's doing it for us. It's creating a new VNet. It's used the name to create a name for that and set an address range and so on. If you don't care about any of this and you're not interested in networking or you're new to networking, you want to try this out, you can leave this as is. That's absolutely fine. But if you want to change that, you can fiddle with the IP ranges and some of the firewall rules and so on if you want to. Again, this is allowing the inbound ports onto the network. So this is allowing 3389. And one thing I would recommend is ticking this box so that when you delete the VM, it will delete the NIC and the public IP as well. Load balancing is, again, not something to worry about right now. If you were starting to have inbound traffic, which you need to balance across VMs or so on, then you could use something like a load balancer or application gateway. But again, bear in mind, these all add costs, particularly application gateway is not cheap. Some management stuff. So Defender for Cloud is the security software that we will, it's for free, the basic version, so I would recommend turning that on. Identity allows you to assign identity to your VM. So if your VM needs to access other Azure resources, if you're running an application on there that needs to access things, you would use that. For the basic setup we're doing now, you can ignore that. Log in with Azure AD. If you want to be able to log in with your Azure AD account we created earlier, rather than using the username and password we just added to the VM, you can tick that. And that's a useful thing to do. When you do turn that on, it will turn on the identity because it needs that to enable Azure AD, but don't worry too much about that. You can have auto shutdown, so if you wanted the VM to turn off at certain times of the day, you can have that enabled. You can back up the VM, and you can enable patching. Hot patching here allows you to have updates applied without actually restarting the VM, which is, I'd leave that on. Monitoring, you can turn on some monitoring, some alerts about the VM and health monitoring and so on if you want to. Boot diagnostics is always useful, and the managed storage account option is the default, which will do all that work for you. Wouldn't worry too much about the advanced piece at the moment. This is where you can do some additional things like installing stuff on the VMs, running installation scripts and so on. We don't need to care about those for right now. Tags, you can assign tags to pretty much any resource. They're just key value pairs if you want to use those to help identify resources, identify who created them, all those sort of things. You can do that. We're not going to do that. And then we get to the last page for review and create, and we can just review what we've done. It is, again, warning us that RDP ports are open to the internet, which is not great, and we are going to fix that once we get the VM deployed, so don't worry too much about that. And just validate all that, and then we're going to go ahead and create. And that will go and deploy the virtual machine for us. VMs do take 5 to 10 minutes before they deploy. You can see here we get a deployment status screen, and this is showing what it's deploying, so it's going to go through the various pieces it needs to deploy. So it's not just a VM, it's created the public IP and then the virtual network and then the NSG, which is a network security group, and then the actual VM itself is being created. We can see there's stuff in here already. But if we click on the VM, it should show that it's still being created. Yep, so that is being created. But we can see already we've got our public IP address. And one thing I'm going to show you now while we're waiting for that is some of the networking. So if we go into networking, and so here we've got some inbound port rules on the network security group. And you can see the RDP one is configured to accept data from any source and any destination. If we click on that, and if we go to the source option here, which is where the traffic's coming from, you can see you've got a few options. And one of them is my IP address. And when you click that, it will set this value in here to be your specific IP address. It will work that out for you. If your IP is static, that's great. If it changes on a regular basis, and you may find you get locked out later, so you might have to change this when that happens. But what you've got there, effectively, now if we save that, twice, means that if change that back, it should now have that. Yeah, that means that the only person who can RDP to that machine now is me from my network, and not anybody else, which makes it a lot more secure. So hopefully now, yeah, this is now running. And I'm going to open the RDP client, and we are going to connect to that account. Now you can either copy and paste the RDP, the IP address, or you can go over here to connect, and you can click the connect button, and you can select this, and it will allow you to download an RDP file. Okay, and the RDP file is essentially all the information you need for the RDP client to connect. So if you click on that file once you downloaded it and click connect, and it will ask you for the credentials. I'm just logging in here. It will give you a certificate warning because the certificate on that machine obviously isn't up to spec. And you can see here, I've RDP'd into the VM. There's not much going on with it at the moment. One thing to bear in mind, though, is that the B1 series is a pretty small machine, pretty low spec, and it will take a while to start up, particularly the first time it has to apply any updates or anything. You might find the first few times trying to log in, it doesn't work. I would go so far as to say if you don't care about the OS, I would use a Linux OS for that machine. You're going to get more resources out of it. Yeah, just bear that in mind once you've got the VM up and running. It might take a while for you to log in for the first time. Back in the Azure portal now, so we've tested that out. Now you can use that VM. You can do whatever you want. Remember, you can only get to it from your machine, your IP address. Change that obviously if you need access from other IPs. You can add additional ones and so on. But use that however you want. When you come to the point that you are ready to get rid of that VM, you don't want it anymore, you want to create a new one maybe, or you just want to delete it, you can just come in here and go to the overview and click the delete option. Or the other option you can do is you can actually go to the resource group, which has got all those resources in it. And as we tick the box, when you delete the VM, it probably would have cleaned most of those up anyway. But if you go to the resource group, you can actually hit delete resource group, and that will delete them all for you anyway. And so we'll go ahead and you have to just tell it that you want, type in the name to confirm that you do want to delete it. So we'll hit the delete on that, confirmation, and that will go ahead and clean up all those resources for us as well. So that's another important thing to remember. If you don't need resources anymore, make sure you clean them up. And that's it. You've created your Azure account, you've got familiar with it, and you've created your first resource, in this case an Azure VM. Hopefully now you have a good understanding of how to use the Azure portal, how to get started, and you'll go and have some experimenting and play with those other services and look at implementing whatever your projects you want to run in Azure are. I'm sure we'll have some additional videos in this series diving deeper into a few different areas, but hopefully that was useful in just getting you started, getting you in and creating resources. And hopefully that's the beginning of you having fun with Azure. If you want to dive deeper into any other Azure services, different ways of deploying things, infrastructure as code, those sort of things, feel free to check out some of the other videos I've got on my YouTube channel, and they'll help you dive a little bit deeper. For now, have a great rest of your day.